So, okay, great. So as I mentioned, okay, we're going to be looking into another aspect of look development, and that is compositing or creating the look or developing looks, lighting, shading, and rendering for 3D elements that you're going to composite over live action footage. Similar to basically everything you see in, big budget movies. So for example, if you need to composite, let's say a tank over live action footage, then obviously that's you know an application for that. So for example, that one, see, it's a lot of times it's invisible, so it has to be seamlessly integrated. But on top of that, with regards to the development of the look, lighting, shading, etc., it has to seem it has to be seamless, right? With regards to how it's integrated in live action footage. So notice that, see, that one really looks integrated. It looks like it's part of the entire, Now, there is an aspect of this that we won't cover, and that is match moving, which is the process of recreating or calculating the camera movement from live action footage. So we won't cover that because that's visual effects, and we won't cover advanced compositing as well, or even intermediate compositing. Okay, so there's one aspect of this, right, that you're probably not familiar with. To be able to composite a 3D element in this shot, okay, for example, something like that, you have to be able to match the camera movement of the live action footage. Okay, and the way to do that is you use what we call a match moving software, or it's a process called match moving. So if you are familiar with something like 3D Equalizer, which is one of probably the most popular match moving tool out there. So again, this is an example. It's really good at not only matching the camera, but sometimes matching the set as well. So see, you need to match the camera movement so you can integrate 3D elements on top of that. Now, we won't really cover that aspect. What we will cover though is perhaps how to integrate 3D elements and how to develop the look for 3D elements composited over live action footage. Okay, so why are we covering this? Okay, as a look development artist, you know what? Let's just have a look at this as well. So hopefully you can hear me. So see, stuff like that, right? So obviously, as a look development artist, what you'll probably end up doing is setting up. So even if you didn't do the modeling, you'll definitely set up the lighting, the look development, the rendering for that for those objects. And you might not be doing the compositing, but there might be instances where you also need to do some of the compositing there. Okay, so we won't cover too much of that, and the reason why we're covering this is oftentimes, right? Notice that when they're looking for look development artists or lighting TDs, lighting TD can sometimes be I guess a part of being a look development artist, although it's a very technical aspect of that job. But oftentimes, see, you work with look development artists. Oftentimes, they will require you to have knowledge in something like Nuke, which is a compositing package, and you need to understand, camera setups and also how to integrate 3D objects over live action footage. So similar to this one as well. See, this is, I think, look development. And notice that with look development, some understanding of 2D compositing and how that process of match moving and how that visual effects process works. So it's an expectation for you guys with regards to, being a, for example, this one, lighting, technical director, similar stuff, look in work, look dev. And notice that, again, it's nice to have high-end live action production experience, meaning producing photoreal work and compositing 3D elements over live action footage. Okay, so I'll show you a lot more, even for something as simple as, let's say, environment generalist. So basically just doing environments. Notice that oftentimes they want you to have a good understanding of compositing and working with visual effect shots. So I can show you lots of other examples for that, but I'm just trying to convince you that this is really an integral process or integral skill, as a look development artist. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Okay, so with regards to assessment 3, with that said, With regards to assessment 3, you're going to be creating a visual effect shot. This includes the development of the look of the shot, but at the same time compositing it. It will be more lighting, more setting up your renders than actual compositing. There will be a little bit of it, but most of it will be 3D based. Okay, so you're going to be compositing a 3D element over live action footage that I'll provide. Okay, that means it has to integrate seamlessly or as well as you can over that live action footage. So obviously this character is 3D, and notice that again, you have to think about, I have to match the lighting, you have to match the environment. You have to think about, for example, the environment. If this is a live action environment, you expect the live action environment to also cast shadows and reflections on your 3D object, right? So there's a lot of things you need to think about. Similar to this one, see? So notice that you have to match things like lighting. You want to, for example, match things like lenses, depth of field. If there's a little bit of noise, you also want to match that. Okay? Okay, so what are you doing? This is a really rough version of it. I'll expand what you guys need to do, but I gave you, I basically gave you a zip file, which is a project folder, and we'll have a look at that in a sec. But you're going to recreate, you're not recreating this. I'll explain what you need to do. But you're going to be doing something, I guess, similar to this one. So you're going to, again, composite 3D elements, develop the look, shading, lighting of those 3D elements, and composite it over live action footage. This is a simple version of it. You will actually create a slightly more complicated one, and I'll just demonstrate that in a sec. Okay? Okay, so with that said, let's just have a look at the scope sheet that I sent you guys. Okay, so if you don't have access to the scope sheet, make sure you have that. So I'll just copy the link and I'll just share that with everyone here. So if you have a look, okay, that's great. So looks like some of you have experience with a little bit of compositing, which is good. Again, we won't cover more advanced stuff like match moving, but we'll look at a little bit of it, I guess. So again, if you have a look at our week 9, right? In our week 9 channel, notice that you have your scope sheet there, but you also have a zip file. Okay, so just take note that with that zip file, the assets you need to do, the assets you need will be there in that zip file. Okay, so again, what you're doing, and this is really just a brief explanation of our context with regards to the project you're doing, right? So maybe I'll just expand this or zoom in. Okay, anyway, so it's basically a 3D scene. I'm providing the 3D scene. It's probably around 20 seconds. And what you want to do is you want to use your look development skills to integrate the 3D elements there. Expand the scene. Okay, so you can expand the scene, make it look more realistic. But the idea behind this is you have two warriors there. Okay, sheltering themselves in an ancient temple. So obviously you want to perhaps expand that ancient temple. I think it's the, not sure the footage. It's probably in Taj Mahal, or I might be wrong. But again, you want to use the existing footage and expand that to make it look more like an abandoned temple or ancient temple. Okay. Now you want to expand the scene as needed. I'll show you the scene in a sec. But you can add more into it, but you need the characters there. Okay, so this is the link for the project folder. So what that means is that is a zip file. So let me just explain what the zip file is for some of you who haven't tried using a zip file. So a zip file is basically, it's going to look something like this, guys. And for a zip file to work, you have to extract it, right? So to extract it, you have to right click on it if you're using Windows, and you just need to extract all. Okay, and then extract it to a folder that you like. Okay, hyper realistic. Yeah, we're going for photorealistic. It's probably going to take less in terms of render time compared to your two other assessments. The reason is you don't have an environment. So the reason why it's slow is because well, the past renders is you have, especially assessment 1, you have multiple bounces of lights, you have an environment there, but this one you don't even have an environment. So it's definitely easier easier, but it's going to still require some rendering, right? It's just, I guess it's just the nature of what they're doing. Okay, so again, everyone, if you're using, let's say Windows or Mac, you can double click or extract it, but you need to extract it. Once you extract it, you get a folder like this, okay? And it's a Maya project folder. So if you're planning to use a different software, okay? So if you're planning to use a different software other than Maya, perhaps you want to use Blender or Unreal. Again, we're only covering Maya techniques. So to do that in maybe Blender or Unreal, you might look into other resources. So maybe it's a good idea to just use Maya. Or if you really want to do it, what you can do is from Maya, you can export this into an Alembic file or your USD file, and then you can use it in, let's say, something like Unreal or something like Blender. But might be a good idea to just use Maya for this. Okay, so in that project folder, everyone, you have your scenes directory there. That's your shot. And then on top of that, you really need to unzip it, right? You need to set up the project properly because you won't get the textures or any of those assets there. Okay, so let's just have a look at how you can open the folder. Again, we start off with a zip file, and that zip file is downloadable using the link that I sent in Microsoft Teams. So just to prove my point, I guess, unless I have too many stuff open here. But anyway, let's just have a look. Okay, so Teams. There you go. Okay, so see, that's your zip file. If you download that, that's probably around a gigabyte. So it's a relatively big one. So make sure to download that and then just unzip it, right? So right click and then extract all. And what you're looking for is you want to look for where the project folder is being saved. So say this is the project folder. What do I mean by project folder? You already know that in Maya, this is the project folder, the warrior shop, and inside it are the subdirectories. Okay, so just make sure that when you set the project, you set it up using this main folder here. Okay, so I'll do that. Okay, I'm going to go File. I'm going to set the project, and I'm going to look for that project. I think it's under, geez. So I think it's under this one, and then LLD, and then Warrior Shop. Okay, so see, so this is the project folder. Once you start seeing the subdirectories, right? That's your project folder. Don't select any of the subdirectories though. You just want to make sure that none is selected, but you're inside this Warrior Shop, and then hit set. And then when you open your scene, see this it's under the scenes directory. Open the assessment 3 shot, and then just click on open. Okay. What a lot of you do is you like double clicking on scenes. I never double click that. We never do that in production. So again, a lot of you just end up double clicking a scene. The problem with that is you're not setting up the project. So you'll end up losing some of your textures perhaps. So make sure, right, to always set a project. See? Then open the scene manually by just going to open scene and then going to your scene subdirectory. Okay? And then there you go. So what you're seeing, or what you should see, is something like this. Make sure your hardware texturing is turned on so you can actually see the textures. If you don't see the textures, that's obviously an issue. You didn't set up the project properly. So make sure to set up the project properly. If you have issues with anything else, it won't work if you don't have the textures there. Because you won't see, I mean, you need the textures because you're trying to, create a seamless render or a seamless composite. So you need the textures there. But anyway, the shot will look something like this. So you have an interior, okay? It's not even an interior, but it starts off inside the temple. And I placed an object there to really test your skills. All those objects are fully textured as well, so you don't even have to do a lot of shading and texturing. It's more about lighting and then developing the shot. So if you have a look, everyone, see, it's just, make sure again, on top of that, you run it at 24 frames per second, right? So again, under your settings here, under time slider, make sure that you're running it at 24 frames per second. And this one isn't set to play every frame. You have to make sure it's set to 24 times 1. And this is the shot. Okay? So you have those two warriors there. And then you have, again, at the end, you have that creature or whatever hanging out in the, outside, I guess, intimidating those two warriors there. Okay, I added a few objects there, like those 3D elements there. again, the reason why I'm adding that in is just to enhance. We call this process set extension, or just enhancing the set. So we're extending the set, or we're just, I guess, um, so see, if I don't have that, then you start seeing the people there. So again, what we're doing is we're just enhancing the set and extending the set so it actually looks believable. So what you can do is you can add a few more things. So see, if you feel like you want to duplicate that or add your own assets and maybe position that anywhere in the scene, you can. So see, so you can do that as well. And the reason why you might want to do that is you want to sell that idea that this is an an interior of an ancient temple. So again, these are just your starting assets. I can't stress that enough. These are your starting assets. You want to expand that to make it look like an abandoned temple, because currently it looks like a very clean one. See? So it looks like it's a very clean one. Okay? I'm adding this in because this is the tricky bit. A lot of you will spend a long time just creating and matching the set like this. So I just did it for you. So I just added it in. You need this later on in the process to separate the things that are in the foreground and the background and a lot more other things. Okay? Okay, so what you're trying to do is you're trying to enhance, expand this existing scene and then create a final shot, right? So to create the final composite, you probably want to use After Effects or Nuke for that. We'll just use After Effects to create some sort of photorealistic composite. Okay, similar, I guess, to something like this. So notice that I didn't even put the other elements there. But see, notice now, it looks, a lot of things I can still modify. But again, notice that there's things there that you need to think about. Number one, see, notice that you can actually see the shadow of this person here. See, you can even see the reflection. So this person is casting a reflection on the floor because this is a reflective floor. On top of that, you have shadows coming from this character here. And then, again, lots of other things that you need to think about. So it's not just putting that in. You have to think about this object matching the light. See, you even have a little bit of that God rays or volumetric fog coming from the sun and hitting our object there, our character there. And then you want to match the lighting, and you also want to match the shadow areas. And notice that you do even have reflections there. Okay, and this is really a very rough one. It doesn't look that photorealistic, but again, we're going for photorealism. Okay, so is that clear for everyone? Just checking what you need to do for the final assessment. Just checking. So you have your scene file, you have your scene, not file, but scene directory or your folder there. And then you have the assets there. Let's check. So where is your footage? The footage is actually there under plates. So see, that's the image sequence, but you also have the movie there. So under plates, that's your movie. Okay. So see, this is the original movie. Okay. So just take note of that. Now, as I mentioned, for this particular class, I recommend that everyone download the stuff here. So I'm going to share it again. But anyway, I do have a exercise folder there. I can zip that, I guess. But you know what? I'll just share it. So let me just share this. So again, the reason why you need this is if you want to follow along with some of the stuff here, then you have the scene file if you want. Okay. And I'll also issue the week 9 challenge using some of the assets there. So let me just share this in the chat and then plug that in. So hopefully everything's clear in terms of what you guys need to do. Okay, so that's the link. You can also access that link by having a look at our week 9. I think I shared it earlier. So see, under class, you also have, geez, there you go. So week 9 exercises. You can choose to download it. You can choose not to. Again, it just helps you follow along some of the stuff we're doing. Okay, so I sent it via chat. So you can download that as we go, as we move along. Okay, so this is, again, I'm assuming that this is clear for everyone, right? In terms of what you need to do. So let's just have a look at a few things, okay? So the first thing I want to have a look at and we want to test is your ability to, I guess, use compositing as a way for you to create, these types of shots. Okay, so we're going to have a look at compositing basics first, because in the last assessment we covered a compositing process, or a look development process called passes, right? So remember from last assessment, you know how to create a beauty pass, the diffuse pass, and again, it's just an AOV, it's just a pass you can easily create in Maya. And it's useful, especially when you're trying to control or trying to play around with, let's say, the look of an image and breaking down your renders into different passes so you can manipulate that in compositing. But we're going to expand this knowledge, okay? Technically, so an expansion of this is in 3D, you can also do things like layers. Okay, so what do I mean by layers? Similar, I guess, to something like this. So notice everyone see that shot, right? Notice that, see, rather than rendering it as one image, you can actually render it in different layers, similar to what you do in Photoshop. You can do it, let's say, the background first, the midground, and the foreground, similar to this one. Notice that it's similar to passes, right? In fact, if you're doing this professionally, there's really no distinction between a layer and a pass. I'm just putting a distinction there to make things easier for you. But in actual production, we can just say layers and we can just say passes. It doesn't really matter. It's for us, it's the same thing. But for you guys, what I mean by layer is perhaps something like this, right? I can render the foreground separately. I can render the background separately. So just to show you, so see in this shot, right? Notice that you can render the background separately, the foreground separately, even the lights, and even the effects, or the, let's say, the particles. Definitely the particles, you want to render that separately. So I guess similar to this one. So let's have a look. So see, notice how many layers this shot actually entails. Now the reason why you want to do layers, right, is obvious. For example, if you're doing, let's say, effects, let's say you have smoke or fire coming out of those chimneys. If you render everything in one go, that's going to be problematic, because for a lot of you who done simulations, it's hard to get a simulation perfectly right in terms of render. It takes time and experimentation to see if it has noise and all of that stuff. So you don't want a situation where you're just rendering it, and then if something goes wrong, then you render it again. So what we normally do, especially with a complicated shot, is we like to render, let's say, the effects or the fire separately, the dust and the smoke separately. Maybe we'll render the background and the foreground separately. And there's a lot of reasons, why, optimization reasons why we're doing that. So if something goes wrong with your fire, you don't have to re-render the entire thing. We can just render just the fire layer, and we can modify just the fire layer. Okay, so again, that's the reason why we're doing all of those things. Okay. Okay, so just to expand this, okay? For example, if you're trying to composite, let's say, 3D elements over, let's say, live action footage, okay? If you have a look at the folder that I sent you, or the exercise folder that I sent you, the first one is compositing layers. It's basically just your background there, okay? And then you have things like your beauty pass, your depth pass, occlusion, there's reflection, and there's shadows, okay? Those are EXR files. So let's have a look, okay? So let's just have a look at what I mean by layers, okay, and the power of having those layers as I mentioned, separate images. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open After Effects, which is a compositing package, but not really to the degree of something like Nuke, right? So if you're doing it professionally, you probably most likely end up using Nuke. After Effects is pretty good as well, but it's really not meant for high-end compositing. But anyway, I'm going here, right? The first thing when you're doing After Effects, you want to specify the project settings first. So I'll go project settings, because you want to make sure that your color management is active, right? So how you go about doing this? Go to File, Project Settings, Color. Color, make sure that we're using OCIO. Now the reason why we're using OCIO is because in Maya, okay? I'll go here. Notice that our color management settings is OCIO. So the reason why we're using OCIO inside After Effects is because we're using the same color management system inside Maya. Okay, and notice that our rendering space is actually set to ACES CG. The display space is basically the display, the colors in our display here, and also when we do a render test. But for this one, see, notice now that again, we have this rendering space. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to use the same color space inside After Effects. So I'm currently in After Effects. That's why I went color OCIO. Configuration, guys, remember we use CG, so ACES CG. And I think the working color space there, ACES CG should be fine. Okay, and then I'll just hit OK. Another thing, perhaps, let's just have a look at the settings again. That should be fine. One thing I did do though is I did go 32 bits, and the reason for that is when you're doing more advanced or professional compositing work, your images or your assets will probably be in OpenEXR, which is a 32-bit format. So if your compositing package is not 32 bits and you're using 32-bit images, it's going to be a problem because you're not maximizing or you're not interpreting or you're not using the actual information coming from your images. So what do I mean by that? If this is 8 bits and you're grabbing OpenXR files which are 32 bits, then the processing will always be wrong because now you only have 8 bits of processing. Basically, your effects are 8 bits, but you're actually using 32-bit images. So we just want to make sure that we're using 32 bits for this. Okay, not all of the time. I'm just saying in this particular instance because we are using OpenXR files. Okay, anyway, I did okay. So under compositing layers, I'm going to perhaps drag all of them and maybe just drag them directly here. Okay, or you know what? I'm importing them anyway. So I'll just double click here, compositing layers. Again, you access that using my the exercises there. But you can just watch at this stage, okay? Okay, a few things here. Notice that I have a shadow layer, a reflection, an occlusion, a depth, and a beauty one. And all of them are OpenEXR files. And all of them were rendered coming from Maya. So what this means is their color space will probably be correct, meaning they have the ACES color space. So that's actually fine, okay? The only issue though is this one, our background image or our footage, okay? So our footage, this one, okay? Notice that it's washed out. The reason why it's washed out is because After Effects is treating it as the same color space as our 3D rendered image. The thing is, it's not the same color space. This one is actually shot with a camera, and if it's digitized, this in particular instance is a JPEG file. So with JPEG files, it's usually sRGB in terms of color space. So what this means is our profile, okay, for this is wrong. So we need to change it from background. So okay, our background, the profile After Effects is adding is the ACES one, which is good for 3D rendered images, but not really for this because this is a JPEG image captured using a camera. So the correct way of doing this is perhaps right click on it first, interpret that background. Okay, so you need to do this for, let's say, any live action footage because most live action footage will probably be in not an sRGB format. It's probably going to be an HD. What's the common format? I think that's. Let me just have a quick look. So with regards to color, if it's shot in film or maybe shot using a digital camera, they might have a particular Rec 709. It might be Rec 709 or it might be Rec 2000, depending on the camera that's being used. Okay, but for us, this is an RGB image. So what I'll do is I'm going to change it, right? So again, I'll interpret that, right click, interpret footage, and then I'll go to color. I'll just look for RGB. Maybe this one. Or you know what? There's show all there. Turn that on. Currently it's off and it's hard to look for an RGB one. This one is RGB, I think. See, I don't even have an RGB. This one is RGB. You can use that if you want, but I can just show all. And I can just perhaps use this one, sRGB display, ACES 1, SDR. So it's basically sRGB. And notice what happens. See, that is, as I mentioned before, or this is AC, there you go. So that's before. Notice now that this is after. See, it's not the same. It's not trivial, right? So it's not trivial at all. We need to make sure that the correct color profile or space is added. Well, I'm saying color space, color profile interchangeably. They're not the same thing. So for us, because we're doing it in a very basic level, when I say profile or space, I'm just referring to perhaps the same thing, the same concept behind it. So again, we're just going under main here, color, and then I just specify that to sRGB. Okay, now our colors are correct. Okay, so let's start off with, again, I'm showing this because I'm just demonstrating why rendering in layers is important and why we need it in this particular context. Okay, so for example, our beauty pass, basically that's our 3D rendered objects in 3D. So it's our 3D objects rendered in, let's say, Maya, and we want to composite that over live action footage. This is already interpreted properly. So what I'll do, everyone, is I'm going to create a composition first. And for this composition, I'll just drag the background and create a new composition out of that. And basically what this does is it just creates a composition with exactly the same settings as the image that I used, meaning it will have the same resolution and the same frame rate. This one, it's using, doesn't really matter the frame rate because it's just a still, but it just has the correct resolution. Okay, so guys, this is my background. So see, that's my background layer. Relatively straightforward stuff. If I'm compositing a 3D rendered object out on top of that, what I can do, this beauty pass, or beauty layer, sorry, I can just drag that on top of the background. So basically how this works, it's a stack, it's a layer-based compositing workflow, meaning the lower layer is going to be the back layers, like the background. The top layers will be the layers on top of that, which is the foreground or anything in front of it, right? So basically in front is the top, the bottom is going to be the background. Okay, so see, notice now that this works. The reason why this works is because your beauty, you have to make sure that it has an alpha channel. So see, this 3D rendered image has what we call an alpha channel. And the alpha channel specifies which areas of the image is transparent and which one is opaque. So if it's white, basically it's going to be opaque. If it's black, it's going to be transparent. And what happens is, if I just drag that in, by default, After Effects is smart enough to know that that image has an alpha channel. So what that means is it's going to use that alpha channel to create that composite. Okay? Okay, so a lot of you will stop there, but when you're doing things, we seldom get the perfect result. So when we're doing CG over live projects, maybe our CG is 90% there, maybe look-wise, right? It might be 90% there, it might be 95% there, meaning the look, the realism of it might be around 90%, even 80%, but it's seldom going to be 100%. And the reason for that is there's going to be, to integrate this properly, right? On top of live action footage. Live action footage, guys, usually have noise, okay? It usually has film grain, it has noise, it has imperfections like dust, and also camera lens distortions that are really impossible to render in 3D. Okay, so for example, film noise. You can't render, it's really hard to render. The stuff you get in 3D is always going to be clean. So it's going to be hard getting a 3D rendered image with film noise on top of it. So you have to do the film noise in compositing. That's why when I say it's your 3D rendered image will probably be just around 90, 95%, or maybe 80% with regards to, it being seamlessly integrated to your live action footage. Sometimes you have to do a lot of stuff in compositing to make it look realistic. Okay, so see guys, for example, this one, okay? This is looking okay, but what I'm thinking is, again, I won't spend too much time with it. Maybe I'll just do a simple color correction where I just go to my levels and then perhaps adjust that. And again, maybe, you know what? So see, I'm just trying to adjust that, and maybe I'll lower down the white, maybe the black, maybe gamma. Okay. That actually looked better earlier. So maybe something like that. Okay. So again, on top of that, I can even add as I mentioned, I can add noise or grain. So for example, I can add grain. So see, and maybe I'll use, let's say, the entire thing. And maybe this grain is going to be a particular film stock. So let's say an Eastman film stock. And maybe I'll lower down the intensity to, let's say, 0.1 or maybe 0.2. See? So notice, guys, see, that's before, that's after, and we're just adding some grain because I can see the footage also has grain there. Okay? So now I have, I guess, something like that. Okay? Okay, so relatively straightforward stuff at this stage. So we just have a background and I have a beauty layer, and basically that beauty layer sits on top of the background. So now we have that there. But there's a lot of things that are obviously missing here. Number one, if you expect a 3D object there, so any object, in fact, if you have that object in your footage, you expect that object to cast shadows, right? So for example, here, see? Notice that the shadows are actually being casted by these objects. The direction of the light is actually different. So no, this is, see, that's the reflection. And then I think the shadow is going left to right. Let's have a look at other elements there. I'm just looking at it. So see, notice that there's a little bit of reflection there. The shadow is actually going, the lights come from here, so the shadows are also going that direction. And I'm just looking at other things there. Okay, so basically what this means is, to make this look better, you need to have some sort of shadow here. Okay, this is where perhaps creating some sort of shadow pass will work. So see, guys, that's a shadow pass, or that's a shadow layer. So what I'll do is I'm going to plug that shadow layer in between the beauty pass or the beauty layer and the background. So it's maybe somewhere there. Okay, so see, guys, notice that, see, we're seeing a little bit of it. So see, there's a little bit of it, but we probably want to color correct that. So maybe I'll just go to levels. Again, the reason why it has to be between the beauty and the background is because if you think about it, the shadow lies underneath the object on the floor. So you can't have that above the object because you'll now start seeing the shadow on the foot there. So you probably want that somewhere there, right? So let's have a look. I'll color correct that and let's see if we can just find or get that shadow more visible, I guess. So there you go. See? So now we're starting to see the shadow. Okay. So see, guys, notice now that I do have the shadows there. Okay. Maybe I can adjust this. Or you can even duplicate that if you want. So maybe something like that. So see? So you can duplicate that if you want. If you can also blur it out, right? So for example, under effects, I can go blur. And I can have, let's say, a Gaussian blur. And maybe just a value of 1. Or maybe, you know what, 3. Let's try that. So see, notice now 3 looks like it's getting there. So that's before, that's after. So we have a little bit of that. Okay. So notice that that shadow does add a lot to our image, right? So for example, maybe I'll just modify this a bit further. So maybe something like that. And maybe 5. Okay. So notice, guys, now that I do have a shadow there. Okay. So again, we have a background, we have a shadow layer, and we have our object there. Let's have a look at another one. Okay. Now, another thing is, if this is a reflective floor, you actually expect some sort of reflection coming from your character onto the floor. This is what this reflection layer does. Okay. So this reflection layer is basically, well, contains the reflection coming from your objects to the ground. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll drag that, plug that into, let's say, the bottom layer there. So see, that's your reflection. Okay, now for the reflection, everyone, for the shadow, you probably want that to be multiply because it darkens stuff. But the normal works, but I'll just want to perhaps multiply that. You know what? The normal one that actually works for that. But for reflections, okay, as I mentioned with passes as well, reflections are always going to be either screen or add, depending on your mode. So let's try screen first. See, notice what happens there? See, that looks like a better looking reflection, right? Because again, you don't want that to be just normal, meaning you don't want that as just a straight on composite. you want to add or screen the pixels coming from your reflection onto the floor there. So what I did was change the mode to, let's say, screen. Okay, I can even take it, or let's try add. Add. So add is fine as well. And then I can even take it a step further by perhaps blurring that out. So let's just do a fast or Gaussian blur. And then I'll just change it to, let's say, 3. Or maybe, you know what? 3 is fine. So maybe I'll just use 3. Or you know what? 2. And I think it's a bit too much. So what I'll do is I'll just lower down the opacity. You can do that by just pressing T on the layer. And then I'll just lower that down. So see, that's what I want there. See, just that amount of, I guess, layer there. See? So notice what happens, everyone, right? I have background. I have reflections. I have shadows. But you know what? The shadows probably need to be behind the reflections. So maybe something like that. And then I have the beauty there. Okay? So what I'll do is maybe add one more. So I'll skip the depth, but I do have occlusion there. But with occlusion, basically, it just adds some soft shadowing onto your object. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just multiply that. So this layer just adds additional level of, I guess, soft shadowing onto our scene. So what I can do is perhaps with that occlusion pass, I'll just go adjust it. So color correction and then levels, right? And then maybe I'll adjust that. So see, so that's our occlusion pass. I just want it to be darker. So maybe something like that. Okay. And maybe I'll just lower down the opacity. There you go. So guys, that's before, after, before, after. Okay. And maybe, you know what, maybe I like that. I can still adjust it, maybe improve the lighting in my scene. But notice now that I do have that composite already, right? So again, take note, I do have that background, the shadow, the reflection, the beauty, and then we have the occlusion there. Okay, so is that clear in terms of why we're doing or why we're creating layers for this type of project? So does anyone have any questions at this stage? So I'm just showing you why you need to render in layers in this particular, type of project. So relatively clear. Any questions? So just checking with everyone here if that makes sense. No, so the question is, will it follow the form? It will follow the form. I know that this is a still, but if you render it, if your object is animated in 3D and you set it up properly, then your reflections will follow the form as well. The form of the floor. Okay, so yes, the reflection is animated, but let's say your floor. So a good question from Edric, it's what if the floor is, let's say it's rocky. Okay, so let's say the floor is rocky. The floor has, it's made of sand, or maybe it's made of pebbles, or maybe it's a very rocky floor. Okay, so what you end up doing is you have to go through the process of set matching or set fitting, meaning the 3D artist will end up recreating parts of the floor, not the entire floor, just parts of it. Okay, meaning I'll probably end up creating a really, we can do it by scanning. So if you do it in production, we have LiDAR scans, which is we end up scanning the environment and bringing that into 3D. So we actually get the floor. But if you don't have a scan, you can use cameras. But if you don't have cameras or you don't have anything at all, we're just given the footage, you just model it yourself manually. Okay? So what that means is you recreate, you model the floor similar to what it looks like in the real footage. Okay? So hopefully that's again, when you set this up, it will follow the movement of your character, but to make it follow the contours of your floor, you have to recreate the floor. Okay? So that makes sense. So any other questions, or is everything clear at this stage? Okay? Again, the reason why we're doing this, or why I need you to understand the importance of layers, is because, again, It's not the only way to do a composite, but it's an essential method or technique to be able to do these types of projects. Okay? So I hope that you understand the importance of perhaps layering your work or layering your renders so you can create a more realistic composite. Okay, so with that said, no other questions. Okay, that's great. So let's have a look at perhaps how you can create some of these layers. Okay, so again, we talked about what those layers are, but now let's start looking at how you can create those layers. Okay, now before we look at how you can create those layers, let's just explore a few fundamental things. Okay, so I'm going to open Maya, guys, because these are really important things that you need to understand. So everything will be, I guess, easier when you start creating layers. Okay, so number one, let's have a look at the idea of primary visibility. Okay, so what I'm going to do, everyone, is I'm going to create a simple plane, and that simple plane there, and I'll just turn off the grid. Don't even know how to do that. Show grid. Okay, there you go. Okay, I'm going to create, let's say, a polygonal cube, and then maybe a polygonal sphere. Okay, and then I'll just reposition that there. Okay. Scale it down. So let's have a look at this idea of primary visibility. Okay. So everyone, let me just create a very simple, let me just create a light. Okay, so light, maybe a directional light, and maybe with that directional light, I'll rotate that, maybe rotate like that. And then let's see what it looks like, I guess, rendered out. Okay, so I am going to render this one out. And then Arnold, render view, and then render IPR. Okay, so again, guys, notice that I have something like this. Okay, and perhaps I'll just modify, move this down, and maybe this one, I'll just move it here. Okay, there you go. Okay, so let's have a look at the idea of primary visibility, and we covered this already. Okay, so currently all of your objects are visible, which is good. Okay, but notice, guys, that if you select any object, right? If you have a look at the attribute of that object, notice that in the shape node of that object, you have something called render stats. So any object, okay? So for example, notice that this one, right? I'll select that. Under P-cube shape, notice that it has render stats. In fact, you can even use the Arnold tab there, okay? What we're looking for, everyone, is a special attribute or parameter called primary visibility, if you guys can see that. So I'm selecting this. Notice what happens if I turn off primary visibility. See? Notice what happens, everyone? I turned it off. I turned off the primary visibility of that object, but take note, it still has the shadows coming from that object. Okay? So, if I assign a new material to this, let's say an AA standard surface, and I'll make that really, I guess, reflective. Maybe this one, I'll assign a new material to that. And then maybe I'll assign that to be a standard surface as well. And maybe make this a red. Okay, and maybe this one, I'll assign a material to that as well. Maybe another AI standard surface. And then make that blue. Okay, there. Okay. So as I mentioned, everyone, okay, notice, right, that any object, if you turn off the primary visibility of that object, notice what happens. You still see the shadow casting from that object onto other objects. You can even still see the reflection, right? But notice that the object itself is gone. Okay? Now, this is quite important or quite useful when you're trying to light objects, perhaps. When you're trying to either light objects or you're trying to recreate the effects of light bouncing onto your objects in a 3D over live or on a visual effect shot. So, for example, you want to simulate, there's in your live action footage, there's a wall there, and you want to simulate the shadow coming from the wall hitting your 3D object. you can just recreate that part of the wall, okay, like this. And then what you can do, so just imagine that's a wall and it's casting light onto your 3D object. But you don't want this visible, right? So what you can do is you can just turn that off. Okay, the primary visibility. And notice that we are able to recreate the effect of that wall. Okay, so the wall is in live action, meaning it's part of the footage. But to recreate that, see, I can just do this one and then turn off that primary visibility because I don't necessarily need that visible. Okay, so does that make sense for everyone what primary visibility is? In fact, I think you have primary visibility in both the Arnold and the render stats area. Okay, so see, notice that you have primary visibility there. Okay. Now, that's not the only thing, okay? Because if you have a look at the Arnold tab, notice that you actually have something there called cast shadows. So see, you can tell it not to cast shadows, okay? So there might be instances, for example, maybe for this object, I want that there, but I don't necessarily want that casting shadow onto my other object. So what you can do is you can turn it off. See, it still has the reflections, but not the shadow. Similar stuff. You can also turn off diffuse reflection. Notice that you don't have any diffuse reflection there. And then you even can turn off specular reflection as well. Okay, so notice that there's no reflection. If you just want one reflection for all of them, I think it's here. So visible in reflections. So see, I guess I can turn that off. Let's see. Update currents. Probably not. So it looks like I can't. This one, I have to go inside my object under Arnold, and I can turn off diffuse reflection and specular reflection. So there you go. Okay. And now, on top of that, you even have other things like diffuse transmission, all of that stuff. You can turn it off on a per object basis. Okay. So hopefully that's clear. Okay. So primary visibility, clear for everyone. What it does, it will be useful in a lot of instances. Okay. Next thing, matte object. Okay. And this is very important, especially in visual effects when you have, so for example, if you have a 3D object interacting with a live actor, right? Or maybe interacting with live objects. So sometimes the 3D object goes behind the live action object. It goes in front of it. It's interacting with it. So for example, I have my hand here and then my 3D object is here. So my hand is occluding that that object, right? So there will be instances where you need what we call a matte. Okay. So just to show you guys, okay, this object, for example, okay, the problem with primary visibility, right, is if I turn that off, notice what happens. See, I actually end up just turning off the object itself. That's not what I want. Okay, so let's say this is live. Let's say that's a building and this is an alien object that you need to composite on that building. Okay, so yes, I can turn off primary visibility so I don't actually see that recreation of my building there. Okay, so the building again is live action, right? So I just want that building there to cast shadows there. But rather than turning off the primary visibility, notice that there's also something there called matte. If I turn that on, everyone, notice what happens. See, now it's black. More importantly, notice what happens in your alpha channel. See, that becomes a hole. Okay, so yes, it becomes black. So just to show you, but more importantly, right, what happens in the alpha channel itself is it's actually going to be a hole there. What that means is if you composite that onto live action footage, what you're going to be getting is just, so what that means, right? What you're going to be getting is just that sphere, guys, or that flying saucer in the background. Okay, so it's going to appear like the flying saucer is behind the live action building. When I say live action building, it's part of the footage, right? So what this means is if I just put this in our context, okay? I guess to put it in our context. For example, this one, okay? If your object, or you have an object going behind the temple, okay? So if the object goes behind the temple, okay? To create a matte or to make it appear that it's going behind the temple, but you still see parts of it, you want to create a matte object around the temple. And that creates that illusion. Okay, so that's why that matte will be important later on the process as well. Okay, so again, the alpha channel allows us to composite that really easily in any compositing package. So just checking if that makes sense. Any question with regards to that? Again, any questions with regards? Relatively straightforward. You know primary visibility, you know matte objects. Okay? Let's have a look at a couple more. Okay? Maybe the last ones. And then we'll have a look at how to set it up in Maya. Shadow mattes, everyone. Okay? So let's have a look at shadow mattes. Okay. Maybe I'll just turn this off. Okay, there. So this is our render. Okay, there you go. Okay, so this is our render. Okay, now what if we want to composite? So let's say these are 3D objects and we want to composite that over, let's say, live action footage with a ground, meaning similar to what we have here. Okay, so for example, this one, right? The ground is actually so the ground here is coming from our live action footage. Okay, so the ground, again, is coming from our live action footage. Okay, what we want to do is we want to composite the reflection coming from our object onto the ground. So what this means, everyone, is I can't just copy the ground I have here, this 3D ground. That's not going to work. I want the ground here, but I really just want the reflection and even the shadows. I don't want the ground itself. So again, I don't want the ground itself, right? I just want the reflection casted on the ground. So meaning I need the solution where I can just get the reflection coming from our object onto the ground. And there's a special material just for that. Now, it doesn't really matter if you're using Maya or Blender or whatever 3D application you have. That application will have a version of this material. If you're using RenderMan, it has its own version. Basically, in Arnold, under Maya, the material we're looking for, and let me just remember, because I end up jumping a different renderers really. This one, I think it's called AI Shadow Map. This one, okay? So let me just assign that AI Shadow Map on our object or on our ground. So if I add that in, notice what happens, everyone, okay? Now, you can't see it. Everything becomes black. Let's see if I can just render this again. This one is... So this one has the shadow matte. This one has the correct material. I'm just curious why it doesn't have... It's not rendering out our object. So quick sec. Okay, it's actually there. But let me just see why I can't render this. I might have accidentally turned on. That's weird. So quick sec, guys. Let me just have a quick look. See? So that other object, it's weird. Assign new existing material, Lambert. And then let me just change this to car paint. Okay, and then... Okay, anyway. Okay, so what I have currently, everyone, is see, notice that we are getting our 3D objects. But on top of that, see, if you have a look at the alpha channel, we're actually getting the shadow, okay? Coming from our light casted on the ground, okay? Now, just to prove my point, okay? If I just want the shadow, sorry. If I just want the shadow, notice what happens if I rotate the light itself. So see, that's the light. If I rotate the light, notice what happens, see? We're actually just getting, we're getting the shadows. So it's not rendering, okay? It's not rendering the ground. It's rendering just the shadow and the object themselves. Okay, so again, it's not rendering the ground. Okay, but it is rendering the shadow coming from our object hitting the ground. But it's also rendering the object itself. And just to prove my point, see, we are getting the objects themselves, guys. So see, Notice now that, you know what, if I just duplicate that so you can really see there. Okay, so we have an issue, right? Our issue is we do get the shadows. So see, those are the shadows. Those areas there, those are the shadows. But we're also getting the object. But I don't want the object. I just really want the shadows. So if you just want the shadows, right, and not the objects themselves, pretty easy what you need to do, right? If you remember, everyone, if you don't want something to be visible, all you need to do in the render anyway is to just turn off their primary visibility. So see, notice now this one and this one, turn off their primary visibility. Notice now that we're just rendering just the shadows. Okay, and just to prove my point. So see? So it looks dark. Everything looks dark. But if you have a look at the alpha channel, which specifies the transparencies, basically you're rendering the shadows and just the shadows. Okay? So again, I'm rendering just the shadows. Now, some of you might be asking, why am I turning off primary visibility? Okay? The reason for that is in compositing, I just want the shadows. I mean, yeah, I just want the shadows on the floor. And the reason for that is I can manipulate it, similar to what we did earlier. See, guys, if I just have the shadow as a separate element there, what happens is I can manipulate it separate from everything else. So see, I can do a blur. See, I can do a blur, or I can perhaps modify that as needed, right? So see, and then notice now that, see, having that as a separate object just allows more flexibility and creative possibilities. Okay. So again, the idea behind it is I can assign an AI shadow matte object to that, right? And notice now that I can also turn off primary visibility on our objects here, primary visibility, and now we're only getting the shadows. Okay. So does that make sense for everyone? What the shadow matte is able to do. Now let's just explore the shadow matte quickly. Okay, so the shadow matte is basically a material you assign onto the object and it basically catches shadows. So it's a shadow catcher similar to what you have in Unreal and in any application really. So it catches the shadow. Okay, notice that you even have shadow color there, and maybe I can change it to yellow and let's see what that looks like. See, notice that I'm catching the shadow. The shadow is yellow. And I am able to catch that without catching the object itself because I turned off the primary visibility. Now, if you want to modify the opacity of the shadow, you can just do this as well. So see, so it's basically lighter now. So it's a yellow color, but it's lighter. So obviously, maybe for this one, probably want that to be black. Okay. Now, don't panic because it disappeared. It disappeared because it's black. Okay. So notice now that it's still there under your alpha channel. Okay. And then there you go. Okay, so hopefully that works, okay? Or hopefully that makes sense for everyone. Next thing, okay, and probably the last thing for now, anyway, the reflection matte. So we know shadow matte. You know how to just isolate the shadows coming from your render. Let's have a look at how you can isolate just the reflection. The good thing for us, guys, is in Arnold, it uses the same material for reflection catchers. So we have a shadow catcher here, but it's actually also a reflection catcher. It's actually a light catcher as well. But anyway, okay. So if I just want the reflection this time, I can just turn off shadow opacity, meaning I'll just remove the shadows. So notice what happens there. I think I turned off shadow mask. There you go. So I'll just turn off shadow mask or shadow opacity. So there's no shadows. Notice now that I can turn on indirect specular. See guys, we're just grabbing the reflection. If you don't believe me, just a quick sec here. See, I'll just turn on primary visibility again for both of them. See guys, notice what happens. I'm isolating the reflections. See, we have reflections there, but to isolate the reflection, notice what happens. I just want to turn off primary visibility for both of my objects there. And now I'm isolating the reflection of those objects. Let's have a look at the alpha channel. See, the only issue you have is the alpha channel is for the entire floor, but it's no big deal because for reflections, you normally just use screen or add. So oftentimes when you're doing screen and add, you don't necessarily need an alpha channel. But if you do want an alpha channel, let's see if you can find it. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like you can. at the basic level anyway. You can do that using a lot of other methods. But for us for now, guys, see, notice that I don't really have a way to put an alpha channel. But again, compositing, remember, when you're compositing a reflection, you don't necessarily need an alpha channel. See? So you don't necessarily need an alpha channel. You just end up using an add. And anything that's bright is going to be added onto the image. Anything that's dark is just going to retain what image you already have. So see, guys, notice that again, I have that, right? So we're just adding that in. So just to prove my point, I think, see, that's a reflection. It doesn't really have an alpha channel, right? So alpha, actually, this one actually has. Okay, we'll just have a look at that particular method later on anyway. Okay, so anyway, going back, see guys, I have RGB there. So I think you can add the alpha in the actual rendering. Screen is a math. It's similar to add. It adds pixels, but there's I think the math behind it is. So let me just remember, because I seldom use screen if it's OpenXR, but screen, I think the math behind it is it adds everything above 0.5 brightness, I think, if I remember correctly. So anything below 0.5 brightness is not going to be composited in the image. So I think that's it. But again, it's just another version of add, just to make it, I guess, easier. Okay. The best way really is to just have a look at what it does. Okay, so if you have a look at After Effects, so see, notice that I'm using add. See, in this particular case, add and screen looks the same. So add, screen, see. I think screen only goes from 0 to 1 or 0 to 255, meaning it doesn't really do high dynamic range image or 32-bit images properly. So see, add, and then that's screen. See, slight difference. There is lighten as well. It gives you a totally different look. But there's some math behind it. Not sure what the specific math is, everyone. But it's, for me, it's just testing, playing around with it and see what works, or what it looks like. It's really impractical to memorize what each one does. So for example, vivid light, it's impractical for me to understand the specific math involved in the vivid light blend mode, but I can just visually see what it does. So rather than trying to go deeper, I'm happy with just playing around with it. Okay, so with that said, everyone, okay, so I think we've done that. Let's have a look at, okay, so at this stage, let's have a look at how we can create those layers. Okay, so I'm going to perhaps use a scene. Okay, maybe I'll just use an existing scene that I have. Now, if you want to use the file that I sent you, it is under exercises there, under render layers. You can open that, but you need to plug in. We'll end up using the background there and this one. Okay, so basically open that scene. Okay, and now I have something like this. Okay, so I have a camera here. I just want to add a background image for the camera. So again, the reason for that is it helps me reposition objects. So I'm looking through my camera, everyone. Okay, remember how you can add a background for your camera. Again, the background is not for compositing purposes. It's just for me to have a reference and properly place things with regards to the background, right? So this is not for compositing purposes. It's just for reference purposes. So I have my camera there. I'm selecting my camera and I'm going to import an image plane. And the image plane I'm importing is the one I sent you, which is the bg.jpg. Open that. And basically, I now have that background there. Now, the problem is if you have a look at the perspective view, see, it automatically puts it in a position that's very, very near. So what you can do is you can select the background, okay? And I'll just go to the channel box and I'll just go to depth and then increase the depth to, let's say, 5,000. And basically what that does, it just position it farther, okay? Without, it doesn't really compromise anything. So see, notice that that's 20, okay? It's near the, or maybe that's 100, okay? So it's near the camera, But I can also change it to 2000. It's farther away, but it doesn't really change the perspective at all. Okay, so now I have something like this. Okay, now the process of match moving or set fitting is basically repositioning your camera and repositioning your objects, particularly your line, your ground. Okay, matching the ground and matching the elements. In this particular instance, I'm trying to match the ground, guys. Okay, so see, notice now that that actually looks good. Okay, see, notice that the ground is level with the ground we have in our live footage. Okay, and just to prove my point, if I, for example, select and then change the transparency, see, so that one looks okay. So see, notice now it's fitting well. See, the parallel lines there, the lines there are parallel with the lines in my footage. So that's actually matching up really well. Okay, so this is a process called set fitting, meaning positioning your camera. So see, I'll just be careful. Positioning your camera so it actually fits. So see, I don't want that because now it doesn't fit. Okay, so what I want is I want to reposition our camera so it fits our scene. Okay, so see, now I'll just reposition that. And now see, that is correct. So this is the process of match moving or set fitting. Match moving really. So we're trying to match move or match the camera. So see, now the cameras match. But if this is live footage, meaning it's actually moving, then you have to go through the process of match moving. It's a bit more complicated, but the idea is we're trying to match the camera angle and the camera move and the camera direction. So see, so that actually works really well. Okay, and maybe I'll just undo. There we go. So everything is matched properly. I'm happy with that. Let's have a look at how we can start perhaps creating our layers. Okay, let's start off with having a look at our main tool for this. So different softwares will have different ways to create different layers. Blender has one, RenderMan has one. In Maya, everyone, the thing you're looking for is the render layer editor. Okay, and I think it's this one. Okay, so that's basically render setup. It allows us to create render layers. Okay, so let's just have a look at from some really easy way of creating a render layer. So currently, what we currently have, right, is everything is just in the same layer. Basically, we're in the master layer or the master scene. Okay, so this is basically, again, we're currently looking at our scene, or we're currently rendering our scene using a master layer. Okay, so that's why we're seeing this. We just have that master layer there. Okay, now we can actually create a multi-layer system by creating layers now. Okay, so instead of using the master layer, what I can do is I can start creating my own layers. So I can create what we call a render layer. Again, to do that, go to this render layer or render setup button. You can also access that under Windows, rendering editors, render setup. Okay, so anyone here who's tried using the render setup before? Anyone who tried using it before? If it's your first time, totally fine. But if you've used it before, that's good as well. Okay, but the idea behind it, right, is we're opening the render setup. We're going to create our render layer, which is this one. I'm clicking plus, and maybe the first layer, maybe I want to separate. There's really no wrong or right way to do it. For me, for example, is how you want to set up your scene. So for example, for me, maybe I just want my foreground robots to be in their own layer and my background robots to be in their own layer. Or you can even have each robot having their own layer if you want. But for me, I just want to be able to control my foreground robots separate from my background robots. So it's really subjective, okay? There's really no correct way to, I guess, it's really how you break down your scene. So for me, as I mentioned, I just want my foreground robots to exist in their own layer. So maybe foreground robots, okay? Again, I just added a render layer there by clicking on that plus button. Okay, so that's my first layer, everyone. Notice that that layer is currently renderable. In fact, your master layer is also renderable. It's visible, but it's also renderable. So what I'll do is I'll just make sure that this is visible now. So you're basically viewing the scene, the master layer scene, which is this one. See, notice that there's an eye there. You're basically using or viewing the master layer. So what I like doing is I like turning that off. Okay, if you can't turn it off, see, I can turn off the render, but notice that I can set this to be my visible render layer by just clicking on this eye thing. Notice that there's nothing in this layer. So see guys, I created the layer, there's really nothing there. To prove my point, the moment I change it to, the moment I activated the eye or the visibility there, notice that there's nothing there. So see, that's everything there. But notice that that layer, if I activate that, nothing is visible because we haven't added anything yet. Okay? So what do? I'll start adding the objects I want for that layer. Remember, I want my foreground objects to exist in their own layer. So what I'll do is I'm going to right click on the layer. I'm going to create what we call a collection. So create collection. So a collection is basically the objects you want in that particular layer. So I'll just call this collection, let's say FG robots, for example. Okay. Now, all you need to do now is drag, middle mouse drag and drop the objects you want in that collection here. You can even group things if you want. But for me, guys, see, I'll just want to perhaps drag. Yeah, it's almost like light linking, but it's not just light linking. It's basically a scene within a scene. So I can create my own scenes within the scene itself. Okay? And that each of those scenes can have their own lights, their own cameras. But again, for this one, it's basically a way for me to just do layering for now. Okay, so see guys, FG robots, what I can do is I can middle mouse drag those robots. Again, I haven't done this before for a long time now. Maybe I'll just drag that there. So see, it looks like it's working. So middle mouse drag, okay? Or you can just select this and I think I can just add, okay? And notice what happens. See, with the layer visible, again, this is where a lot of you might get it wrong. See, you want to make sure that you're viewing the correct layer. So see, we're viewing the master layer, guys. We want to make sure we're viewing the correct layer by making sure that that eye is turned on, okay? So it's pretty obvious now, right? That what we have in this layer are just the foreground objects, similar to what you have there, okay? Now, before we continue, let me just add a few lights because we don't actually have lights there. So let me just go back and delete this very quickly. I went ahead and created my own layers already, but let me just add a light, okay? And for the light, I probably just want to add a very simple directional light. This is not, I'm not trying to recreate this too much. Maybe I'll just see where the lights are aiming. So maybe there's a light going that direction. I'm just basing it off here, guys. It's not even a direction light. It's probably an area light. So maybe something like that. Okay. And I'm basing it off this bright area here. So see, there's a light heading that direction there. And now I want to perhaps use an HDR. I want to simulate the lighting coming from the environment. And that's where I perhaps use an HDR. And I'll just use a sky dome light. And maybe there's an HDR there that I sent you guys. So you just want to use that. So that's a file. Look for that HDR. I think it's this Tokyo big site environment. You know what? I'll just use this. It's cleaner. So let's see if that works. Open K. Okay. And then I'll just rotate this light. It doesn't really matter. We're just viewing, so you don't have to make it perfect. Just want to see if I'm able to just reposition it. So I just want to reposition that. Maybe I'll just make that smaller. You know what? Maybe I'll just use the other one. I think you guys have this one as your light. You know what? Let me just open or use this one so I could see it. Not sure if it's that. And you know what? Doesn't really matter anyway. So maybe I'll just do it like this. Okay. And I'll just make that significantly bigger. There you go. maybe like 500. Or maybe, again, I'm just adding a light. It's no big deal, right? I'm just trying to make that a little bit more accurate. So maybe something like that. Okay, anyway. So I just have the light. The reason why we want a light is because you can't see the results unless you actually have a light. So I'm just adding those two lights there. Anyway, going back, everyone, render layers, right? Remember, to create a render layer, we're viewing the master scene. So what we need to do is perhaps add our own layer. I'll call this FG robots. Okay, so foreground robots. And what I'll do is I'm going to add those foreground robots to that. Remember, you have to create a collection by right-clicking on the layer and then adding a collection there. And I'll just call that call FG rob. Okay, and then I'm going to middle mouse drag the foreground robots there, or I can just select that group and then add that in. Okay, and now they're part of it. Now, again, to view that layer, and this is the important thing, you have to view the layer. You're currently still viewing the master scene. So what you want to do is make sure that this is visible. In fact, I'll turn off the renderability of the scene so it won't render out. I really just want to render the layers. So see guys, notice now that we have that there. Okay? So we have the robots part of that layer. Okay? Now the thing is, a few things that need to happen though. Notice that you actually want the lights coming from our scene, right? So if you want the lights, the existing lights, you can create your own lights just for this layer if you want. But for me, I want to use the existing lights, meaning the direction light and the master, this sky dome light in our master scene. I just want to use that same lights for this layer. So what I'll do, see this one guys, these are the lights for this master scene. You can actually just drag and drop that here. So see, under the layer, drag that to the layer. And notice that basically what you're doing is you're telling Maya you want to use the lights coming from your master scene and use that in this layer. Because the thing is, the layer can have its own lights. Okay, so meaning the lights and objects can exist only in that layer. Okay, so we have to specify that we just want to use all of the lights coming from our scene, and I middle mouse button drag that directly to that layer. Okay, you can even specify you want to use the same render settings coming from your Maya scene or for your master scene. You want to use that for your layer as well. So see, I can even drag and drop that there. Okay, see? So what this means, everyone, is I'm using, right, the same. I usually prefer just putting the collection up. But you know what? That should be fine. Okay. Anyway, the idea behind this is I want to use the render settings of our master scene and the lights coming from a master scene in that layer. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. If I render this one out, let's see what it looks like. I'll go Arnold, render view, and let's see what this looks like. I'll just hit save, and then I'll hit play. So notice guys that it does render it out. Okay, I might need to modify the lights. We do have one issue though. Notice that the lights or the background is visible. See, even the alpha channel, it says that it's visible. Okay, so what I can do, everyone, and maybe for this light, it's a bit too bright. So let me just lower the intensity. Okay, so maybe something like that. And maybe for this other light, maybe, you know what, I'll just rotate it. It's a bit too bright. So maybe like that. Okay, and for this light, I'll just bring it higher. So maybe something like that. Okay. Okay. We have one issue though. It's rendering our HDR light. Okay. Or our image-based light. What I can do though is I can go to the image-based light. Okay. The light itself. Notice that it has visibility. The reason why it's visible is because under camera visibility, it's currently set to 1. So if you just want that turned off, just make that 0. And what happens is if you render it out, hopefully it doesn't crash, but when you render it out, it shouldn't give you the background, the light anymore. So it doesn't render the light. Okay. And let me just quickly check if this is actually working. Okay. So let me just, now on top of that, I think we turned it off. Let's render that one out again. Update full scene. It might be still giving me the background. Let me just temporarily turn that off. So it's still giving me the image plane, guys. So what I'll do is I'll just go and select the camera. Remember, we have an image plane on our camera. So what I'll do is I'll either delete the image plane, or maybe let me just delete that, I guess. Okay, so let me just delete the image plane by just going Edit, Delete All Type, Image Planes. So again, the camera itself has an image plane. Remember the background I added there? I don't want that. So it's just for reference. So I'll just remove that image plane. And there you go, guys. Okay, so notice now that, see, it's well lit. So it's lit. And it only involves or only includes my foreground robots. Okay, so it's this. Let me just do this one more time, this time for the background robots. Okay, so what I'll do, everyone, is I want to perhaps create another layer just for my background robots. So remember how to do that? Press this plus button. In fact, let me just stop the render. I'll press the plus button. This one layer is maybe for my background robots, FG robots. Okay. Again, I want to make sure that's visible. Okay, so it's visible now. Notice what happens, guys. See? Now I have nothing there. I want to use the lights coming from our scene and plug that into the robots. I even want to use the same render settings. Plug that into the background robots. The only thing is, I just want to specify what objects are going to be inside that background. So what I'll do is I'm going to create a collection again. I'll call that call BG Rob. And then I'm going to select my background robots. I'm going to plug that in. Okay. So what I'll do now is, see, notice what happens, guys. To make that visible, I make sure that I just click on that button. Let's have a look. If I hit play, notice what happens. See? I'm rendering in this layer, I'm rendering just the background robots. But in this layer, see? I'm rendering the foreground robots. So I made this layer visible. Notice that it's rendering the foreground robots. But this one, if I make that visible, it's rendering the background robots. Okay, so is this relatively clear what those things do? Okay, just checking if that's clear for everyone here. What the layers allow you to do. It allows you to put objects or have layers with specific objects in them so you can render them separately. Okay, so making sense so far? We just have the way now to create the robot separately. Okay, so see, I have the foreground and I have the background there. Okay. I'll save this just in case it crashes. That's right. So good question from Benjamin. Can you have your own AOVs? Exactly. If you have your own AOVs, if you want to use the same AOVs as the one in your scene, just drag this, right? So, but you never do this. You seldom do this, really. You want each layer to have their own AOVs, specific AOVs to that layer. But just an example, see, I can just drag that. And then this one, I can drag that. I don't have AOVs for this, so it doesn't really do anything. Okay. Okay, so this making sense so far. We do have one other issue though. How can we add the shadows? Okay, so let's have a look. How can we add the shadows? I'm going to add a layer. Okay, and I'm going to call this layer shadows. Maybe shadows on ground. Okay, so the idea behind this is I just want to grab the shadows coming from our objects onto the ground. So, what objects? First off, I need the lights. Same type of lights. I'm going to drag the lights coming from this scene, plug that there. Okay, so relatively straightforward stuff. Okay, so next thing, I'm going to create objects or collection. Okay, and perhaps for this one, maybe I'll call this, let's say this particular collection. Not sure if I'm supposed to create a collection or a group. I'll just try collection first, everyone. Okay. So this is going to be, let's say, all objects, all robots. I can do this separately for the background robots and the foreground robots, but I won't do it primarily because I'll end up with a lot of layers. Just for this demonstration, I'll just have everything in one layer. Okay. So I'll just put all the robots there. So see, guys, I'll put the foreground robot and the background robot. Okay, and I'll plug that directly into the collection. Remember, I'll make that visible. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to again add that in, right? So added that in. Ooh, I'll just stop the render. Whoops, I removed that because I accidentally selected something else. So here I'll add. Okay, so now all of my objects are there. Okay, let me just lock the camera just in case I accidentally moved it. Yikes, looks like I already did. Okay. Anyway, guys, okay, so I have my all my objects there in that one collection, okay? But on top of that, if you remember, you also need the ground, okay? You also need the ground for this. So I'll just make that ground visible, okay? So I want the ground. The reason is I want it to catch the shadows. So what I'll do is I'll add another collection, okay? Again, I'm not sure if it's a collection or group, but let's just try collection first. So collection, guys, see? And this is going to be ground, okay? So I have or ground capture, whatever. Okay. So for this collection, I just want the ground element there added in. Okay. So for this collection has all the robots. This collection just has the ground. And I'll show you why you want that separate. Okay. Now, what I can do is let's have a look at adding a material onto the ground. Okay. Now, in this layer, I can specify a material just for that layer or just for that ground, meaning just for this shadow on the ground layer, I can have a material assigned to the ground and it only exists on that layer. And the way to do that is to right click on the collection. Notice that you can actually add a material override. Okay, so meaning just for that layer, I can override the existing material of that ground and replace that with, let's say, something like a shadow catcher. Right? So what I can do, just for this layer, right click, create shader override or material override, and then I'm going to assign a special material, right? Remember that special material is under Arnold, and that is going to be our AI shadow mat, this one, okay? So let's have a look at that AI shadow mat, okay? Remember, that's actually looking okay. Let's see if that works, everyone, okay? I'm going to render out what this looks like. Okay, so I'll just go to my Arnold render view and then see what this render layer looks like. So see guys, it's rendering, but let's have a look at the alpha channel. See, the alpha channel is correct. Okay, notice now that we do have shadows. Okay, now we have two sets of shadows. We have shadows coming from our HDR and shadows coming from our directional light. So see? So notice now that the shadows coming from our HDR and shadows coming from our, see, I'll just rotate this a little bit so you can see. So there you go. Okay. So what we're essentially able to do is render out the shadows, right? The only issue we have is, like I mentioned, I don't want the objects. I just want the shadows, right? Again, really important thing. I don't want the objects, right? I don't want the robots themselves. I just want the shadow in this layer. So remember how we did that in the past, or in the previous example? We turned off the primary visibility of our objects. Okay? So we can just turn off the primary visibility of the object and just render just the shadows. So how do we do that? Okay? What I'll do, everyone, is I'm going to perhaps go here under render layers. See, all our robots, you can add a material override, but notice that you can actually drag an attribute here, okay? So once you drag an attribute here, if that attribute exists on all of those objects, you have a way to turn off an attribute using a layer. Let me just show you what I mean. I'll select just one of them. See, just that. Remember under screen shape, under render stats, or under Arnold or render stats, there's primary visibility there. Remember, we just need to turn it off. Before you turn it off, everyone, just middle mouse button drag that. See? Middle mouse button drag that here. Let's see if I can just, I think it's here. Sorry. Middle mouse button drag. So render stats, drag it there. Okay? Notice what happens. It creates an absolute override. So basically what that means is just for that layer, it creates a temporary override for the objects in this collection. So I'll just go to my primary visibility. Notice what happens. I can now turn that off. See? Now, just to prove my point, I just need to do it on one object. Notice what happens. The other object will have exactly the same thing. So see? Notice that every single object there will have their primary visibility turned off. The reason why it's all turned off for all of those objects, because they're all part of the collection, the same collection, which is all robots. And I created an override for that entire collection, right? So let's see if that works, okay? This is visible. Let's see if that works. I'll just go under Arnold, render view, and geez, hopefully it didn't crash, but see, let's see. So see guys, I'm going to just render it out, okay? Notice nothing's visible there, but let's see the alpha channel. See guys, notice what happens there? Just for that layer, right? I now am able to render just the shadows of that of the scene. Okay, so basically shadows being casted by our object onto the surface. Okay. So making sense so far? Any questions before we'll just have a look at maybe one or a couple more layers, but is this relatively clear? Okay, so no questions. Perfect. So what I'll do, everyone, is let's have a look at something else. Okay, let's have a look at something else. So just to prove my point, okay, I'll make this visible. See, make that visible. Notice that that works, right? We have our foreground robots. This one, make that visible. That works as well. We have our background robots. This one, visible, works as well. We have our shadows, right? Shadows there, okay? Let's have a look at reflection this time, okay? So similar stuff. Remember, guys? Press plus, right? This render layer is for reflections, okay? And on top of that, what I'll do is I'm going to perhaps turn that on. Nothing is in that collection. I do want, sorry, nothing is in that layer. But what I'll do is perhaps drag the lights here, plug that into that reflection, and even the render settings, plug that to the reflection. Okay, similar thing, really. Okay, if you think about it, we add a collection, all doesn't really matter. So those are going to be all my robot objects. I'll select the foreground and background robots. I'll add that into that collection. So see, they're part of it. So that's good. I do want the ground catcher as well. So what I'll do is I'll create another collection, guys, just for the ground. Okay, ground, ref, okay? And what I'll do is I'll select the ground, plug that in, add, okay? So what I'll do is I'm going to remember, for the ground, we want a reflection catcher. So how can we create a reflection catcher just for the ground? Remember, guys, we can right-click on it, and we can just add a material override, right? Just for the ground. And I'll call this, and maybe I'll just create another Arnold one. Remember, we're using the shader called AI Shadow Matte. There you go. So we're looking for the shadow matte to change the settings of that material. We go here. Remember, we don't necessarily need the alpha. I can even zero out the opacity of the shadow because we don't need the shadows for this. It's the reflection. So what I'll do is I'll go under specular and I'll go, sorry, was that supposed to be? Yeah, that's supposed to be specular, indirect specular. And then let's see if that actually works. Okay, so I'll just go here and then render this one out. And let's see if that works for us. So again, render, update currency. See guys, notice that we do get the reflection there. Okay, so we get the reflection, but we have one issue. We get the reflection, but the robots are still there. Okay, so remember what we need for the robots. Similar stuff, right? We go to the all robot collection. Remember, we right click on it. Sorry, not right click. You can actually right click and create an absolute override directly. But you know what? I'll just click on the settings there. Let's see. So I have that collection. I can't bring it back. There you go, cheese. Let's see, I think I need to select that. So basically what I'm trying to do, guys, I'm trying to go back to that selection. I can modify the selection for, let me just see if I remember how to do that. It's no big deal, right? Because you can always just, maybe I just need to expand this. It's weird. No big deal because I can just create a new one. Maybe I'll right click on that and then delete it. And then I'll just create a new one. So run here, create a collection. I might need to restart because it doesn't give me, you know what, let me just go back here. It's already there anyway. I'll just create an absolute override. Again, the issue I have is I don't have that window. So maybe I'll just reset my settings. Let's do that one more time. Okay, I think there you go. See, so I just reset my workspace, guys, because I lost that property window. Let me just delete that again. And let me just do that one more time. So add a collection. That collection is going to be, again, my robots. And in that particular collection, what I'll do is I'm going to just create an override here. Remember, we just select any object, look for the render stats, the primary visibility, middle mouse drag directly to the drag attribute from attribute editor here. And notice now that we have that primary visibility, I can now turn it off. Okay, so let's see what it looks like. Okay, so if I just render this one out, so see guys, notice now that I do have just the reflections at this stage. So see, no objects, just the reflections. Let's see what this looks like. So see, this one are the shadows. Okay, so again, that's the shadows. Let me just open the Arnold render view. So Arnold render view. So whatever reason, it's strange, but anyway, see, that's correct. And then all my windows are off. I think I'm just using too many stuff. Let me just go back, render view. Yeah, I might need to restart. But anyway, we don't have to. I'm just showing you that for every single layer there, it works. And now I have that working. Okay, so now guys, notice that I have a reflection there. I have a shadow and I have my robots and all of that stuff. Okay, so perhaps what I can do is I can just save them one at a time. So since I'm doing a still, what I'll do is I'll just go under Arnold, just do a render view. This one, for whatever reason, doesn't work. So maybe I'll just go here. See, it's weird. Anyway, I'll render this one out. I'll first work on the robots. So see, the foreground robots is good. So what I'll do is I'm going to go File, Save Image, or you can save the multi-XR, but I'll just save an image. I just really just want one image there. Okay, I'll just call this robots layer. I'll put it in my image directory. And then I'll do the background robots this time. Okay, so I make sure that's visible. And again, make that render. I'll save that image again. So this is actually my foreground robot image. So again, I'm doing it manually, right? I'm doing it one at a time. I don't want to batch render this for now. So I'll just go File, save that image again, and then I'll call that BG robot layer. Okay. And then shadows, similar stuff. Here, make that render out. See, let's check if this is correct. See, that's correct. So that's basically my shadow. Okay. And lastly, reflections, everyone. Let's have a look. So reflections. So see, and then I'll save that again, save image, and then that's going to be my, again, reflection. I probably prefer saving it as an EXR file. I think it saved it as a JPEG. So I would have probably preferred, let's just have a look how it's rendering it. So let me just have a look how it was rendered out, guys. I think I accidentally saved it as a JPEG file, but let's see. That's under projects. See, that's a JPEG file. I can't use a JPEG file. So you know what? I'll just do it again, but this time I'll save it as, again, I'll do it one at a time. Foreground first, then save it as. I'll save it as an image, but maybe under save image options. You know what? I'll just go here, file. I'll just use multi-XR. That should be fine. Okay. So I'll save an XR image. Or if that doesn't work for you guys, perhaps just try save image, but give it a file extension. So maybe be a 4G robots.exr. .exr. See? So that gives you an alpha channel. And then you go here for the background one, and then file, save image as. And then this is going to be bg robots.xr. Okay, so it knows that it's going to be an XR file. And lastly, we have that. Okay, file, save image. And then this is going to be shadow.xr. And then lastly, reflections. And then file, save image, ref.exr. Okay. And let's see what it looks like in our composite. So what I'll do, guys, is I'm going to import the background again. So see, so I'll import the background, making sure that my color management is correct. Remember, this is sRGB. And then I'll start plugging in those other things. Let's see if that works. So projects. Let's look for those EXR files. So this one's. And let's see if that works. Okay. So we have, again, that's my foreground robots. Okay. This is my background robots. Okay. So I'm putting the background first and then the foreground. And then this is my reflection. So I'll probably put that there. And then again, I just need an add there, right? So add, so there's my reflections. And lastly, my shadows, plug that in. So see guys, shadows work as well. So what I'm doing is that's our shadows first, then our reflections, and then our robot, and then our foreground robot. Okay. So does that make sense in terms of the workflow, at least the render layer workflow for everyone here? So just checking, I guess, with Astrid, Benjamin, Danielle, Hazel, all the way to Vivian. Making sense? Any questions? The reason why, so I guess you have all the techniques. Again, we're doing this at the basic level yet, right? You won't be able to do the assessment just using these techniques because there's other things you need to consider. But for this week 9 challenge, what I want you guys to do, okay, is try compositing two 3D objects. You can download it from, let's say, any 3D website, perhaps Megascans. I did this in Megascans. Or you can just use stuff in Maya, perhaps, or any object that you've done or used in the past, or you can just use the robot we have. Okay? But what I want you to do is I want you to composite or add, okay, a 3D object there. This one isn't, so if you have a look at the original footage, see, or the original file, notice that there's nothing there, and there's nothing here, and there's nothing there. Okay? Just concentrate on two. This and this, you don't even have to add the third one. But what I want you to do is create. Okay? Try to recreate this composite. Add some sort of object here. Add some sort of realistic object here. Again, you can download it using Megascan, Substance Source, or perhaps any. So I'll just give you guys a link. Polyhaven has one as well. And then you also have Megascans, right? So just choose. You don't have to texture or do anything, right? Just use those websites. Okay. And then this one, you have assets and then models. So use two assets from any of websites that you know. It can also be from Sketchfab if you want, but try to composite one there and try to composite one here. But guys, notice that, see, there's shadows there. Take note where the light is coming from. Notice that this is a reflective surface, so you need to consider shadows and then reflections on that surface. And what you might need to do as well, so let me just give you guys a link to, so where's the file? The file is, maybe I'll just share it here as well. I actually shared it already. So it's in the exercise folder that I gave you, week 9 challenge. It's this one. In fact, I can just do it here as well. Okay, it's that one, guys. It's a big image, but you just need to render 1920 by 1080. Okay, so what I'll do is perhaps just give you guys an idea. Okay, so that's the image that you want to use. Is the challenge clear for everyone? If you're able to do this challenge, you're halfway there. Okay, meaning not really halfway, but you're probably 40% there in terms of the skills needed to do your assessment. Okay. Good question from Jake. No HDRs for this. So I think for this one, I didn't use an HDR. You can just simulate the light using, let's say, a directional light or an area light and stuff like that. But yeah, no HDRs. Okay. If you can find one, then it's fine. But if you can't, I think I might have used an HDR. I just looked for a kitchen that looks similar to this, and then I just use that as an HDR. Okay, so you can definitely do that. And in fact, we do that a lot in production. When we forget to record in HDR, we'll just look for something that's similar to the environment that we're working on, and then just use that. Okay, so anyway, going back. So how do you perhaps approach this? Okay. So how you approach this, everyone, is you want to import your background first. Okay. Copy that into your images, into your project folder. So if you have a project folder, copy it there. Just too much stuff happening here. Jeez. Projects, CG over live. I'll put it in my source images. Or maybe I'll put it here under data. Doesn't really matter. Paste. Okay, so anyway, how you do this, everyone, is you match the camera first. Okay, so what you do is you create the camera. Make sure your resolution gate is correct. Your resolution, I think that's 1920 by 1080. As long as it's 16 by 9, it's fine. So basically, this one is fine. I'm going through my camera, okay? And then I'm going to import an image plane. Image plane, import image, and then I'll just look for that image. I think I saved it under data, and then there you go, okay? So see, guys, notice now that I have that image. Now, that image, remember, this is the color space. Let's try changing it to raw. So I'll either raw or maybe ASEG. So maybe this one. Okay. Again, you're just using it for reference anyway, so it's no big deal. Okay. Next thing you'll do, guys, is perhaps try to set fit. It's a process called set fitting, meaning perhaps create some sort of recreate, let's say this bit, what's this? The table, and maybe this bit here. So what I'll do is maybe create, let's say, a polygonal plane. Okay. Go to my perspective view. Okay. And I'll just create maybe that one. Okay. Guys, don't, I prefer that you don't move it or you don't rotate it. Just keep it still like that. And then just move your camera. Okay. So what I'll do, see, I'll move my camera. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to match the ground there. Okay. It's going to be tricky. Again, don't rotate this one. You just want to keep it where it is. Don't move, don't rotate. You can make it bigger, but that's probably the only thing you want to do. Don't rotate it. It's the camera you want to rotate. Okay? So maybe something like that. Okay? See, that's looking fine. Okay? So what I'll do is I'll also recreate that bit there. Okay? So I move that. You really just need this area here. So if it doesn't really work that well, that's fine. You can just perhaps... So I'm thinking it's probably going to look, I guess, something like that. Okay. Camera. So that's looking okay. I might need to rotate this a little bit. See that one, guys? That's actually looking fine there. Okay. If I need to rotate this, I can. So see, that's okay. I might need to rotate this as well and then just recreate parts of the wall. Okay. And then afterwards, see, you really just need this area, right? This area here, because that's where I'm asking you to place that object. Okay. And then what you end up doing is just add your object. So again, I prefer that you download something that has an actual texture, right? And that also has a material. But just an example, I guess, what I can do is I can just use one of those as assets here. So maybe asset editor, or was that, no, not asset editor, Windows content browser, sorry. And maybe, again, I don't recommend you do this. I'm just showing you that I can start adding my 3D object now. So once you have your camera lined up properly, guys, you can just lock it. So I'm locking it, or you can just set a keyframe on the camera so that if you accidentally rotate the camera, you can always go back. So see, if you accidentally rotate the camera, you can always go back and play the animation and it goes back to its original, view, right? But anyway, the idea is now I can now start adding my 3D objects. There you go. So see guys, now I can start adding my 3D object there, reposition that, maybe somewhere there. So this is the process of match moving, but you're doing it just for a still. Just imagine doing that for an actual sequence. So see guys, then maybe you add another object there. And maybe... Okay, so maybe... Okay, so there you go. Okay, so what you end up doing is add some lights, do that render layer thing, and then remember, when you're saving your render layers, just save it one image at a time. We'll have a look at how you can render a sequence, but just do stills for now. Okay, so does that make sense for everyone here? I'll just put that in our week 9 challenge. Okay, and again, it's you're doing this instead of a blog, so that means this is marked, or it's it contributes to your final assessment. So let me just add this. Deadline is Tuesday, April. Let's do April 23. Okay, and then recreate that So basically recreate this, right? Okay, so it doesn't post at LLD. Let me just save this very quickly. Put it in my desktop. Sample. And then let's just plug it in. Oh, there you go. Jeez. Okay, I don't know what happened there, everyone. So let me just post that. Okay, so just recreate that using the assets below. So let me just, again, send another link to the asset. So there. It's a big file. It's a 4K file, guys. But um, again, remember, right? I'll just do this one more time. Okay, so this image is relatively big, 4032 by 2688. Remember, everyone, this is a RGB file, so you have to go interpret that. Interpret footage, main, make sure to go under color, and then look for sRGB, this one, SDR. Hit OK. So see, now that's the correct image there. So see, that's correct. Again, if you don't do it, right? If you don't do that, notice what happens. Okay? So if you don't interpret images properly, this is what's going to happen. It's going to give you the wrong result. Okay, so see, if I plug that in, see, that's totally different color-wise. But if you interpret it properly under main, see, you can just change that to, let's say, sRGB, SDR, and then that's correct. Now, you don't have to use the entire thing, as I mentioned, right? You can just change your composition settings to maybe something smaller, like 920 by 1080, and it automatically changes the bottom there. Okay, and then just scale this down. Okay, so I think it's, sorry, the resolution is 1920 by 1280. So it's not 1080, 1280. So what this means, everyone, is if you change your render settings here, sorry, you actually need to change this. Turn off maintain width height ratio. Instead of 1080, it's supposed to be 1280. Okay, so 1920 by 1280. And the reason for that is we just want to make sure that we have the same aspect ratio as what we have in our image. Or if you want to use the full 4032 by 2688, that's fine as well. Okay. Okay, so question from Thomas with regards to, you won't be able, the truth is you'll just have to eyeball it. You can't change, because in production, right, we have a visual effects, so you have a script supervisor and a VFX supervisor with assistants, and every shot they're going to record what lens was used and the settings for that lens and also the film stock, all of that stuff. Okay, in this particular case, we don't have that information, so you just have to perhaps eyeball it. And what that means is you might need to go to your camera, and if you want to change, let's say, your resolution gate there, so not resolution gate, but if you want to change, let's say, your focal length there, okay, let's say to 25, you can do that. This looks like a very wide, I'm almost sure it's 3D rendered as well, but maybe you end up using a focal length of 25 perhaps, and then, but try using 30 first and see, or 35, and see if that works. Okay, so if you're doing this in an actual production, as I mentioned, you'll have information in terms of the lens. In fact, we actually measure the lens because each lens will be different. They have their own distortion. So we actually measure the distortion of the lens. But for this one, we don't have that information. So it's just eyeballing. It won't be perfect, but it's fine. Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up? I think that's it, everyone. So hopefully the challenge is clear. And the reason why this is important is because that's at least technique wise, that's probably around 50, even 60%. If you know how to do it, then you have the skills needed for the last assessment. Probably not all of it yet, but again, slowly building towards it. So do this first, and then just to enhance your skills. Okay, and that's it. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording at this stage, and then I'll see you guys next week. Make sure to have a look at the challenge. Relatively easy to do if you know the steps. Okay, so stop recording, and I'll stop recording as well in YouTube. So I'll see you guys then.